We do have captions today. They are delayed and variably delayed, but if it helps, sitting kind of on the side of the screen and closer up may increase your odds of reading them. This is Ableism is the BBEG, making games more accessible for everyone. I'm Elizabeth McLean. I'm the founder of Open the Gates Gaming, and I have the great honor of being the moderator here today and helping all of you hear from all of the incredible wisdom and experience on this panel. My pronouns are she, her. I am autistic and I have mobility disabilities, chronic health disabilities, and kind of exist at the intersections of lots of different accessibility needs. I'm a professor at Virginia Tech and director of disability studies there, but I want to make sure we get very quickly to the rest of this panel. So we're going to go on down the line. If y'all can share, name, pronouns, anything about your relationship to disability or what you do. Ashley, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ashley Shu. She, her. I'm also someone who works at Virginia Tech on disability studies there. Hard of hearing, chemo-brained, amputee with Crohn's disease and tinnitus. Gotta catch them all. And I'm really excited to be here in discussion with you guys.
Hi, I'm Steve Saylor. I'm an accessibility consultant in the video game industry. I've been working in the industry for about 8 years. He, him. Worked on maybe a few games you might have played, like The Last of Us, Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Doom in the Dark Ages, and also a content creator, Twitch ambassador, and just I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Hello there, my name is Thorman Ganya, and I create content around accessibility and different ways to play video games using alternative control methods. I also am a Twitch partner, and I used to be the leader of the Twitch Black Guild on Twitch itself. Woo. And I have ADHD. There's that forgettable part. And I'm currently looking to an autism diagnosis among a few other things. So
I'm also blind.
Yes.
If that wasn't very good,
Good job, Steve.
Thanks. Undiagnosed, buddy.
My name's Ellie, or Elbel. I'm a Twitch partner. I do a variety of content, big accessibility advocate, and I do a lot of crafting, a lot of TTRPG stuff, a lot of video games, specifically focusing on how we bring accessibility into them and into our everyday life, bringing a lot of awareness about ADHD, as well as an undiagnosed who knows what. That's the fun part about 25 years of no diagnosis, so on the process of that, I'm talking a lot about that. Yeah. That's me.
I'll round us off as the digital nerd in the room. I'm Cam Moody, currently using they, them, but we'll figure out how that goes. I have a slew of neurodivergence going on up here, and I am a digital accessibility professional. I am the lead technomancer with the Dots RPG project. We work with tabletop gaming and trying to bring more accessible options to that space. I'm also the director of digital accessibility at Citizens Bank, and trying to make just all sorts of software stuff easier in our industry.
Very cool. Awesome. Thank you. I want to start with Ashley because Ashley, you made up a new term, techno-ableism. That's a mouthful. Would you like to share what that is?
Yeah, my work in disability studies is around reading what disabled people write about technology, which is usually very different than we see in mainstream media. So I was just noticing an arc in a lot of stories about disability. In a lot of ways, different people with different disabilities were talking about different technologies that sort of have the same sort of observation in them about how we think about disability and technology. So we see this thing that happens with every hearing technology that has developed over 100 years is developed, and marketers say that it's going to cure deafness. And I think about what Jay Verdi writes about in Hearing Happiness, where what it's like as a deaf person to read that over and over again through history. I'm constantly being told that the way you are is wrong, and that other people want to fix you. You see this with other things, the way exoskeletons get criticized as disability dongles aren't actually experiencing their impairments. If you know, when they exist, they like the things people are positing are usually very different than the problems people often have. Often these are offered as like individual solutions, fix your body or mind. We're not going to change any of the structures around you. Tanya Tichkowski calls this making people includable. Right? So we think about inclusion, but if it's always like, oh, you have to do this work, you have to pay all of this money to be included, it's not actually very accessible or very inclusive. So techno-ableism is sort of the way in which ableism informs and overrides our ideas about what makes for a good disability story, what makes for a good disability technology, what makes for a good design, and what superimposes a lot of those narratives with ableism, bias against disabled ways of living and existing in the world. And so I don't think, like, I read a lot of things and I'm like, oh, this pattern matches up. Yeah. It's not particularly like, exciting that I came up with something all new. It's something I think a lot of people already talk about and think about whether or not they have to acknowledge it or not. So I'm really excited. I play Tetris. I have the biggest sense of imposter syndrome today. I took my little academic bit, but I'm really interested is the stories and technologies that disabled people actually want. And I'm so excited to be in this conversation to hear more about gaming stories and gaming designs that I really don't know anything about. So thank you.
You're selling yourself short though, because you played Tetris on a Game Boy Color.
Do you want to learn how to play on Donkey Kong bongos?
No new buttons. I'm still on the NES.
PAX East 2027 workshop. Playing Tetris and Donkey Kong bongos. It sells itself.
That's a speed run right there.
Well, and you also have a Pokemon card.
I do. I had it.
Do you want to show the crowd your Pokemon card?
I suppose. It's my Pokemon card. I did it. Thank you for putting things back. It's a Murkrow.
Yeah, it's a Murkrow.
Oh, it's Murkrow. Oh,
But it
yeah.
does have the what's it called? The Halloween thing for the trick or treat packs. There's a word for these, or there's a phrase for it. If someone remembers, please let me know, because I'm going to be thinking about this until like 3 in the morning.
Looks like a funky crow on a gravestone.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what it is.
My homework is not my strong suit.
No, sorry.
Bring this back.
Well, since you opened this up of like, let's see exactly how it might show up in gaming. Steve, how does this kind of ableism show up on the development side of game design?
It's mostly the thing with video games, kind of even going back into its original history. It's sort of it wasn't necessarily thought with accessibility in mind. When we started kind of getting more comfortable with being able to only hold in order to be able to play a game, you have to hold a controller with 2 hands, and you have to have full faculty to be able to reach all buttons. And as that continued to grow, essentially it kind of locked out players or people who wanted to be able to jump into games like in the 80s and 90s, and unfortunately they were kind of left behind. So right now, with at least the accessibility in the industry, we're just trying to be able to catch up, and that's why we start seeing controllers like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, PlayStation Access Controller, and then any other sort of adaptive controllers like Thor would create to kind of help with folks with mobility issues. Beyond that, also as well, video games, yes, is a visual medium to a certain degree. So obviously that can be exclusionary for blind or low vision players like myself. But it also brings in the idea of, okay, well, audio can be able to be able to fix that and help be able to immerse ourselves in video game worlds. But then also excludes deaf and hard of hearing players too. So there are areas where we're just trying to be able to find ways to be able to adapt and be able to customize the player's experience as best as possible. So that's where we start seeing accessibility options, and then remapping for controllers and visualizations on screen and audio cues for all, trying to cover as many disabilities as possible. We are not at a place where we should be. Actually, sort of a raise of hands for cheers. How many has played The Last of Us Part 2?
Yeah.
Cool, yay. I will say this, as someone who worked on that game and also really enjoyed and was able to play the accessibility of that game, it is not fully accessible to all, and my hot take of it is that the industry was not ready for that game, even though it is probably the most accessible game that is out there. the industry wasn't ready for yet because we just didn't have that knowledge of how to be able to adapt to different disabilities within the industry. So we're starting to grow that now, but we're just kind of still playing catch up to that. So this Last of Us essentially was the canary in the coal mine sort of situation. So we're trying to be able to do our best every that we can, but we're just trying to be able to adapt as best as possible. So
Yeah, no, it's really interesting hearing you talk about that idea of it's ahead of what the industry's ready for, and it's still not enough. I feel like that is such a disabled experience.
Yes, across the board, it definitely can be. There's games that unfortunately that come out that don't have accessibility or don't include disabled people in mind, and it sucks when you hear about a game so much and your friends are playing it and you can't play it. Doesn't mean that necessarily the entire industry is inaccessible. We are making progress in that. It is slower than I think probably people would like, but it is something that it just definitely can be exclusionary at certain times for sure.
Yeah. Ellie, you mentioned working on the player experience kind of side of this. Can you speak a little bit about what that's like, the ableism on the player side of the games?
I think if you've been on social media at all, you hear the argument a lot of easy mode, and I put that in quotations because a lot of games that we're using Souls-like as an example, which is where we see a lot of the argument, is things become easy and the game is not built to be easy. So, and I keep putting that in quotations, into the fact of that doesn't make it accessible at all. So when you're putting different challenge levels of ooh, I'd really like to play story mode, or this is the mode the devs intended, or here, I would like a brutal, nothing can touch me or breathe on me kind of level of challenge. That is a big part of the player experience of being able to kind of choose your own adventure, choose what works for you. And I think when we look at accessibility, that's the biggest thing we all want, right? We all just want what's going to be able to be customized for us.
I love that so much. Because that idea of we're here to play a game. The way I play the game makes me happy, so back off. And whose business is it?
Exactly, and it shouldn't dictate whether you enjoy the game or not, who plays it on what level. Thor's gonna do things that I could never imagine in a video game.
And with a potato.
And with a potato, or bongos, or a combination of both. And
Potato bongos.
yes.
Tasty.
And that doesn't take away the enjoyment that I had in the game. And I'm sure that that doesn't change how much Thor has enjoyed the game. And I think that's kind of the whole premise of video games in my mind as well. They're all stories for us to enjoy.
Absolutely. There's a lot in Ashley's book against techno-ableism that points to this a little bit, which is I think why I was thinking about it. And even you're saying, oh, I just play Tetris. Where sometimes you see at the root of ableism some similarities to when you get to the root of sexism, and the idea of certain games being gamer games and others not counting, and the way things are gendered in easy modes, and do we count what kids play or is it just what adults play? And there is that moment of, hey, maybe this is liberatory for all if we would get on board and stop releasing play. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you saying I have internalized sexism?
Yes. That would be really good.
I'll work on it.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it more later.
This is a therapy session, and so we're doing that.
I should clarify, Ashley is my emergency contact, and I'm working on paperwork so she can make all my legal decisions. So I do think she's got her life together. I just, we'll be honest about this. You are a gamer. I'm gonna say this until you believe it.
I agree with that, and I will say, even if anyone in this room the only plays Tetris or play mobile games, you are absolutely a gamer with a capital G. You should be proud of yourself. So yes, you are a gamer.
You're never too old to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Thor, I'm interested in your take because we keep talking about you and not letting you talk about you.
So, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, absolutely. What are kind of some ways that you see this ableism, techno-ableism, inaccessibility impacting games, especially maybe from the player experience?
I think when it comes to the player experience, I think there's a lot of things that are left out when it comes down to like developing a video game, because you kind of just think, oh, the market, everybody can hold a controller, but the truth is not everybody can. Sometimes people might be losing digits on their fingers, or might not have the motor accessibility that you have when playing video games. Some people might have severe carpal tunnel or other things that affect their overall experience. And so a lot of times when it comes down to the stuff that's kind of left out on this, it's the initial ability of being able to even pick up and start in the first place. And I feel like, nowadays you see more game remapping of controllers. You're beginning to see a lot of alternative controllers, such as the Xbox adaptability kit, as you mentioned. PlayStation also recently released something over the last year or two that's also an accessibility kit. And so you're now starting to see things come out a little bit more, but you still miss this, especially a lot in a lot of AAA games I see that don't have options to say, hey, you can't move your finger like this, or hey, is there a turbo mode where you can do rapid presses? You see some video games nowadays that instead of that tapping mashing mini game that I suck at and brutalize my thumbs for every single time, you now see that that's press to hold. And so those are ways in which they're starting to include, but it's still not widespread. It's gaining more popularity though. But those are some things that are just genuinely forgotten about, and people kind of take that for granted because everybody just assumes, oh, you can hold a phone, oh, you can pick up a controller, you can do this. And the truth is, you can't, and it's more widespread than people would think. You might even know somebody who has to do something in an alternative way because they just can't do the normal. And a lot of times they'll hide this, they won't ask for help, or they'll just say, no, that game's not for me. When in reality, the game is for you, but the devs have failed to accommodate for accessibility in the game. And that's where the real problem comes in, and that's where we see a lot of the technical ableism that occurs. And the way to fix it is by starting to talk to disabled players and getting feedback from the players who actually suffer from those things. And it's not that we have to start it all at once, but we need to start it so that we can continue to build brick by brick into the point where we get to the point where everyone can play video games.
I don't want to just talk about video games, because I would rather be playing a TTRPG, especially one like by you, frankly. Yeah, what does this look like in tabletop?
It looks like a lot of things, so cut me off. But I think I think ableism manifests itself in the tabletop space in an area of ways I want to focus on, like three different.
That's great. Yeah.
One is like how we approach designing games for different people and different needs. One is how we approach the narratives and the storytelling that would surround a disability in gaming, and the other one is just the quagmire of digital tools that exist out there. And I think they all sort of play into this like miasma of discontent when it comes to trying to interface with these games. Like digging into some of those, for me, one of the biggest things is like when it comes to the actual design of games, is we often see what I like to call like the simplification of games to try to make them appeal to the disabled player, which usually means stripping out functions, stripping out rules, stripping out things that are perceived as too complex or too much for someone to handle. And it just boils down to not, like George said, not interfacing with someone who actually has a disability and seeing what their needs are. It's just the assumption that something has to be simpler and less complex to be enjoyed by someone with a disability. You see that happening so much, and it's very frustrating to see someone have to feel like they have to play some stripped down version of a game rather than playing the game itself. It like harkens back to the philosophy that we use a lot in my disability work of like accessible door and back, which is you must have an alternative experience that is different and maintained separately from everybody else's experience, and that tends to result in that experience being neglected, being less complex.
You mean like separate but equal is inherently unequal?
Yeah. Can you imagine that being a troubling concept?
Yeah.
So you see that quite often. I think it's paved with good intentions of I'm going to make my game simpler and easier to digest, but it tends to water it down and make it less enjoyable for someone who wants to just play D&D like all their friends are. And I think that sort of tiptoes to me into what we've seen some pretty good ones, Steve, of disability mechanics. We've also seen some pretty horrendous representations of disability in gaming, and especially in tabletop, where some of the greater games, let's say the Dark Heresies of the world, you'll find a lot of disabilities in a section that they call flaws, And they tend to be like a menu that you can pick from that gives you points that you can spend to gain superpowers in other areas. And I think it's just one of the most egregious things that we still see is either this concept of like, oh, to be disabled is to be flawed, but I'm going to get points back that I can spend on some cool talents, or the complete erasure of disability when it comes to like, oh, you can have, we added a cool wheelchair or a cool prosthetic to our game. It will erase your disability so it's no longer a factor. And it just sort of like, all of these things feel like they are designed to like control your narrative surrounding your disability rather than allowing you to tell that story yourself and keep it a narrative concept.
I just want to say, one of the things that annoys me the most in the tabletop sphere is when people use magic as a way to erase the fact that disability exists.
Yes.
Because it's like, in a world of magic, you would still have disability, you would still have people who deal with things on the daily, but the world would come to accommodate them using those magic systems.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and it's like blindness is one you see dramatized and then erased by magic in like every plot. So the character's blind for one chapter, and then it's like, and then I found a cool spell where I can see mana around me, and then we'll never talk about it ever again. And like that happens over and over and over again.
You don't have to play every character as Daredevil. It don't work like that.
But I have to spend these key points on my loan.
I'm sorry, that just, the key points just got. A second there to recover. Amazing. So, okay, Ashley, you've been taking like notes and I love this. I really want to know what you're thinking, and I apologize, I'm putting you on the spot here. When you were working on this book, it wasn't just like, hey, here's a bad thing. You were also pointing towards solutions for the disability community in some cases.
Yeah.
Like, how do we avoid this mess? And you can speak more broadly, or like, I just want to give you space if you had other things you want to say, because you've got some great notes.
Well, I mean, I'm taking notes because I really love whatever I'm to say. That's not just because I have like brilliant ideas that are happening in this area. Well, no, I really appreciate what's being said. Some of the things that I think about, a lot of times I'm working with like engineers and gamers and game designers, and thinking about like all sorts of technology for disability, is that often people have really like stereotyped ideas about what a disability is. So they think they're designing something for blind people, and I have to have a conversation. I'm like, what do you know about blind people? And have you met any? And like, have you met more than one? Because that's also a problem. Sometimes people meet someone with a particular disability, and they think everyone has the same sort of needs. And like, the thing I know about enjoying other blind people as colleagues, they all want like a different format. Some want audio, some want large text. Like, knowing that they're blind usually doesn't help you make things more accessible. You actually need to know and engage with, what I really like to do is talk about engaging with people with multiple disabilities. So most disabled people have more than one disability. Surprise. I mean, I said catch them all. But there is this sort of sense where even if you have one disability, you're more likely to gather more as you age. And this means that like a lot of the ways in which people think about disability like doesn't map onto any actual person's experience, right? Because you're imagining one disability in isolation, maybe with a person attached to it or not, with stereotype views that have come from different media that was probably written, acted, and directed by non-disabled people about that disability. And a lot of times when we're thinking about designing things, we think, well, it needs to be this imagined person's needs. And what I really like to do, and in the work that Atlas has helped me with a little bit, and some other people on our team, we're allowed to recruit people from our larger area and get together like cross-disabled groups. So we go in with outnumbering researchers. That's important. Usually about 7 to 9 people with disabilities from our region. We select for a diversity of disability types. We get together, we hear about the research and what they want to do. Sometimes it's about video game design, sometimes it's about browser design, sometimes it's about construction engineering and different on-the-job tools in construction engineering. Sometimes there are robot dogs. Those are the construction engineers. Like a wide variety of things. But we're trying to get together sort of consulting groups that don't just take one person's opinion, and that foster a lot of conversations between people in our community and pay them like consultants. Because usually disabled people involved in technological enterprises are expected to be grateful for being included at all, and then usually don't seats. So the fact that we call people consultants, we use their real names, we talk about them as experts in the experience of disability. We're trying to really change that sort of messaging and engage groups that are intersectional with regard to different disability types, especially since it's very rare for people to actually just have one, right? Like what it actually means to gather this is to get much richer feedback and honestly get a lot of fun together as a disability community doing these things. Sometimes what people are developing maps onto what no one wants, or some people want it and it's not the people they were thinking of to begin with. So I like this as an approach to think about all sorts of disability design, and in ways that are, I guess, more complicated than researchers expect. But we also give them really important ways forward.
Yeah, no, because I think about how often I would be excluded from a study because I'm autistic and they just want the mobility disability for,
I see such wild things. We want amputees with at least one, we want them below the knee with at least one inch of tibia. Or we want only people with autism level 1 and they have to have updated paperwork about it. And I have to explain to researchers like, hey, if you're recruiting from this age bracket, no one was diagnosed under the levels. So you're actually you're wondering how you're not recruiting. I can tell you pretty quickly, and the reason you want level 1 is because you don't know how to work with non-speaking people. And you're not actually going to be making the product more general.
The other thing about the disability community that I think so many people fail to take into account as to why it's so important to include people with disabilities on stuff is because the disability community is one of those marginalized groups that you can become a part of at any time.
We're recruiting after the event.
You got a sledgehammer back here?
We did invent a new sport last night at the Disabled Gamers Meetup. We're happy to teach you if you're one of us. I saw some of y'all here. Thanks to
Fun little behind the scenes story. There was someone I know who worked at Xbox, and they got asked at one point, it's like, so what's the best way to be able to care about accessibility? Or the best way, actually, she goes, well, I'll break your hands. You said best, not fast. So, yeah.
I mean, why do they make so many mobility aids out of metal if we're not allowed to use them?
Right?
It seems like a design flaw. Yeah, no, I am really interested, hearing Ashley talk about this consulting and a number of you being accessibility consultants for gaming and doing this sort of work. What do you think this could look like? What are either some pitfalls to avoid or some potential solutions that would help us get more accessible games faster? Yeah,
Hire disabled consultants.
Yeah.
and pay them well.
And pay them fairly.
Yeah.
I think that, Thor's mentioned this already, but asking for feedback and talking to the people is huge. I think that's the baseline for starting.
I would also say just do some damn research. Because gaming, it's a little bit new. It's a newer concept. Accessibility is a concept in gaming. It's a little bit more novice, but I'm stepping in from as someone who's worked in the web space for quite some time and stepping in the tabletop space, and it seems like no one has heard of any of these standards that have existed for 10, 15, 20 years. And it's all out there. It's the best practices, the ways to approach different things. We have this thing called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that has existed for a very long time. That covers a lot. Obviously, nothing is truly 100% accessible, but it covers quite a bit of different types of disabilities and different types of accommodations and assistive technologies, and it's not terribly hard to implement.
I think how often you're trying to teach people to make an accessible PDF.
Yeah, that's right. But let alone PDF, but any virtual tabletop, any character builder, all of them are over-engineered, trying to focus on design over function, but it's not very hard to even take something that has been over-engineered to bring it back to something useful. But it just takes an understanding of how to do that. I think that's lacking. It's just doesn't the awareness that some of these tools exist, that some of these technologies can be used the ways that they are. It's just a matter of learn. Go be curious. Go look and see how these things can be done.
I'd say even from the development side is that we are starting to see been better, but it kind of when it was originally started, when people were brought in, yes, it was the lived-in experience, which I think if you want to be a consultant, at least from a disability standpoint or in the video game industry, is that you talk about your lived-in experiences. If you do have a lived-in disability, that is something that is very, information is very valuable. And then you start to, if you start to learn more about other disabilities, that can kind of make you more a general specialist. So that's kind of what I sort of specialize in, is I do have a lived-in disability, but I've learned about and I've researched and I've talked to other disabled folks from different walks of life that I've been able to kind of sort of glean that knowledge and kind of in the same way catch them all. Like I'm catching all that information and all that knowledge, so I can basically be useful as an overall consultant. But also there's something that I wish that the industry would do better, is that kind of something what you were saying actually, is like not everyone has the same type of disability and that you meet. So like they'll hire me for low vision, they'll hire someone for mobility, they'll hire someone for deaf and hard hearing, but one person doesn't necessarily represent all the spectrum of that disability. There's another consultant that's out there, his name is James Rath. He's a great YouTuber, you should definitely go check him out. But he and I have the very similar low vision disability. There's slight differences, but it's usually either one of us will get hired to work, or if they're good, then they bring both of us in, because we have different perspectives of what we need and what we can accommodate for. So the more you can build to, like if a developer, the more you can build to kind of bring in other folks with similar disabilities, you kind of can get to fill that spectrum, because that is something that that is difficult to do. And like I always tell people, like developers, you'll never have 100% accessible game. It's never going to happen. Only because if it was 100% accessible, it would just be a movie. There would be no interaction whatsoever. But when you try to fill in the spectrum of disability as much as you can, then you basically can be able to cover as many people as possible. And sometimes, they miss the mark. Last of Us, again, probably the most accessible game that's out there. But I have a friend of mine that could not play the game, even as accessible as it was, only because he couldn't hold the actual controller. So when they put it to PC, which was allowed him to play with a mouse and keyboard, finally he was able to play. So that is also even taking feedback from developers, even once the game is launched, taking that feedback from disabled players, from that experience, and utilizing that into future updates. Sorry, I think I went on a tangent there.
No, that was amazing. Flora, I think you had something too.
Yeah, so I was going to say, the other thing I think that just from the dev standpoint that can be done is start accessibility at the beginning of your planning process. So often one of the big problems within the industry that leads to a lot of technicism and that leads to things just not being included is the fact that it's not considered that, hey, we need to include these features that will be able to accommodate people. And so often budget is not budgeted towards that. So you end up finding like, okay, why isn't there remapping? Well, it was kind of the last thing. It's like, if you take the steps along the way to make your game playable for all, it becomes a lot easier to get stuff in rather than trying to throw it in at the last second. You can build with it, not around it. And that's one of the big things that I think a lot of developers in every industry need to do, is take into account that accessibility in general and start planning with that in mind at the very beginning.
Absolutely, yeah, Ellie.
I think to kind of build on that and build on what Steve said and build on what Cam said, in the idea of like, if we could do it from the beginning and we set the budget and we had the information, what if there was like, not a standard or baseline, but like imagine if you look at a game like The Last of Us 2 and you go, okay, baseline, we should include this, and this, and use that as an example. So looking at other games that have been talked about as being accessible or having the best accessibility out there, which still needs improvement, but using that as your baseline as a developer going into your plan goes into, you've done the research, you've looked at examples, and then you're building that in mind instead of building around it at last minute and going, we don't have the budget to hire someone. Yeah.
The other thing I'd really like to see, and I don't think this will ever happen, but I would really like to see more game publishers, game developers talking with one another cross-company to share their technology. One of the biggest ways in which you can help to move progress along quickly is by everyone having access to the same tools to build off of, rather than proprietary secrets in their build and dev work. If people could share the success that they've had in making their games accessible, it means that rather than spending the time to research and focus and build on that, they can now say, okay, we have these things, and while they're not perfect, they are a great start, but we can also take some of our R&D development and start putting it towards other features that have not been tackled before. And that's something that I would just like to see in the industry in general.
A freaking man.
It is something we see in the digital web space.
Players in the game represented.
It is something we see in the digital web space. Is like the bulk of the tools that are used to do accessibility work in like digital web and like helping with all these tools is all open source. Like it is a guerrilla open source effort. These are none of it is proprietary. You'll see folks who have some big high budget. They probably have an accessibility overlay they offer or something that's horrible. But the bulk of it is done open source. And it's all interchanged and intershared, and like I think it's something that could be easily adopted by the industry.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's interesting in disability justice how often they talk about how like capitalism ends up being a disabling force and something that perpetuates ableism.
Fuck capitalism.
Yeah. I'm here for it.
We're never gonna get sponsors this way.
It wasn't us who said it.
I'm saying it.
Well, and it's also funny that when you're trying to be anti-capitalist, you actually have to spend all your time looking at spreadsheets and budgets, and money ends up being a thing you think about. It kind of brings me to a question. What would be your, and I think Ellie, you've actually already started to hint at this, but what would be like your wildest disability dream? Like, let's throw capitalism out the window. Let's throw like all the conditions in the ground. What would a great way of developing games look like? Like, what's the positive example that we can dream and move towards? Like, I love this idea of absolutely from the beginning, we have the budget, we have the people, but like, are there other cool secret ingredients that we could throw in? I completely dropped this on the window one, by the way.
So dream for me, to kind of just go to the start and I'll try and work my way. Dream for me would truly be something that is that, okay, open source, here's everyone's using Unity level, whatever, to make their game. Here's your base accessibility to start. Like, let's build something. And like that just has that there already, I think would be an amazing dream to start base level.
Yeah.
Because that makes it tangible and easy, and then I think disabled people do this a lot. We have to take the load of our disability off of other people if they don't know how to accommodate for it. So finding ways to be like, well, we already did the work, here it is. Dream, start, baseline would probably be that. I'm sure they have much more to add to that, but.
I mean, just to kind of compile onto what you've already said, I'd like to see a global accessibility library. Something, a resource that everybody can use, no cost to entry. Like, the biggest thing that stops me from ever doing something is the cost. Like, there's some programs that I use for photo and video that prevent me from using them because they have great features and I like using them, but I can't afford it. And the biggest thing is when you're disabled or when you have just any accessibility problem, you probably don't have a lot of money in the first place. And so being the person with the least amount of money, you have the highest amount of cost to live. And so I would very much like to see an accessible global database library, whatever you want to call it, that allows people to access these and also allows people to improve on that work and create a database for those changes. And so this way, game developers, tabletop, web dev, all of it can look and say, okay, has there been something that's been done here? Can we improve upon this? Can we work on a fork of this? How do we improve all of it and make it so that everybody can use this without having to worry about how much it's going to cost?
As someone who works in government, it's very exciting.
Please.
Well, I mean, I think about how when we make things with disabled people, when we make things as disabled people and modify them or modify something, that they actually and people with strollers can make it easy, more easily too. I think we should design for disabled people, whether or not disabled people benefit. But I think about in the world of sort of game design, how I'll bring back to game design in a second. How we, you know, when I think about purpose, I also think about things like weighted blankets. Right, those were made in a particular community with particular people, and literally sewing like weights into blankets. And now they're mass produced. And now if you're having trouble sleeping, your doctor says, "Have you tried a weighted blanket?" And they don't work for everybody, but it's something that gets shared outside, and it's destigmatized to the sense that, like, if you're not disabled or don't know what disabilities you have, this is something that is probably affordable and something that might help you. I also think about this in terms of, you know, different settings on like fixtures. Like, not everyone enjoys loud fluorescent lights at them all the time, and how they're not great for a lot of neurodivergent people, and what it means to have different settings and control to make our environments more pleasant to ourselves. And that's not something necessarily, because it's something lots of disabled people enjoy, and it gets built into more spaces, particularly ones that involve disabled consultation and design. But it's not a disability technology. I would love to see lots of game design systems where you can make all of these settings and customize it to the way you want to play and the way you want to engage and the way you want to enjoy it. And that doesn't have to be, like, I think when we make these things around sort of disabled consulting, we end up making a better product more generally, that more people can enjoy. Just like talking about the different platforms, like, yes, don't you want your stories told to more people and more people engaging in them? I don't think it should be the hard sell it sometimes feels like, to get some of these things in place. And I think about, and we've talked a lot about design, but these better stories about disability in general help us think about futures where disabled people exist that aren't magicked away, that don't have a magic prosthetic limb that never breaks, and that you can throw at things if you want to. You know, these sorts of things just seem like written over in a lot of the stories that are told about disabled people in games when we show up.
Even from the development side, there's a few things that have, like, come back to the rest of the researching scenario. Studios need to hire more disabled people as developers, because you have that lived experience that is in-house, within internally, and then also building up. I've seen studios now do this. They really include or create an accessibility champions program. If anyone works in corporate, you've probably heard of like an ERG or like an extended sort of resource group or employee resource group, and it's usually kind of like it's like, you know, we want to include inclusion into our company, and they have some sort of sway within the company, but not a lot. So my idea of when I say the extended accessibility champions network is that you have folks within different departments that have like knowledge about accessibility or expertise in that particular field, and can be able to come together and basically try to accommodate for and customize and to build as many different sort of customization options or game design options that will include disabled people in mind. And then other, like, kind of even some of what Thor was saying as far as platforms, like having engines like Unity and Unreal include accessibility built into the engine itself. Oh, Ellie, sorry.
It's okay, we can be the same mind.
So it basically like having, like, say, a screen reader built into those engines, or a captions engines built in, or an audio cue engine. Like, basically, if you have that built into those engines, then a lot of developers, like mostly indie developers, will have those available to them, and basically with just a little bit of knowledge about how they work within the engine. Then you can see a huge amount of games that are accessible from the ground up because it's part of the engine. Now, there are studios that do create their own bespoke engines, and it would mean having to have those engineers be trained on it. That's where the Champions program comes into play as well. But it's like, it's getting the engine built, because it's so hard to build good accessibility on an engine that just basically is put together by paper clips and tape, duct tape. And it happens a lot. I will say that pretty much, I would say 99% of games you all play are basically put together with duct tape and paper clips. I'm not kidding. It's incredible how well these games are presented. But if you're able to include that from the very beginning, as we talked about, from the pre-production stage and or production of that engine, then it just means that it makes it so much easier to be able to include and also edit as you go, and without having to create essentially band-aid solutions. So,
I just wanted to add one last thing. I think this is just add to the dream scenario of, honestly, I would like to see government subsidies towards accessibility programs when making these things and get grants for that to help on the funding of that. And also, I think another thing that we're kind of glaring at in the room, and while this isn't necessarily a developer thing, it's more of a humanities thing. I'd like to see better healthcare towards disabled people in the first place, as that would help the large majority of the struggle that people deal with within the industry and
Absolutely. I feel like this came up a year ago too, where we're like, you know, healthcare for all. That's the actual, like, that's the baseline. It's really interesting to me because these lending libraries, these tech libraries, these sharing of accessibility solutions are so common everywhere but gaming.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the fact that we're not allowed to have fun. Like, we're only supposed to play games if it's therapy, like those kinds of certain stereotypes that we've had to push back against a lot. But also, like, are people able to access the proper education to become a developer? Can they keep their job? Are they getting the accommodations at work? Do they have healthcare? Healthcare is also about labor rights. I mean, if you can't leave your job without risking dying, is this freedom? Like, I really, really don't think so. And I know, Ashley, you and I talk a lot about how much harder it's getting to fund the type of research we want to do with federal dollars. So weirdly, vote y'all. There is like a very political component to this that I don't think we can ignore, that I will take credit for saying that, like, disability rights and disability justice is kind of at the core of a lot of what you're saying, is what I hear. I do want to make sure I ask this question of what do you think your biggest takeaway is from this? And I was going to start with Cam, but you're giving me a look. Do you want to start or you don't want to start?
No, I got stuff.
Oh,
So
go.
the takeaway for our audience.
Yeah, biggest like, I want to make sure this is set, maybe?
Yeah, I think two things. One is never about us without us, which I think just echoes that core sentiment we've heard across the whole table here, which is just don't do something without including the person who's going to need that thing.
Yeah.
In some way, shape, or form. Obviously, budgets are what budgets are. Maybe you can't afford to get consultants if you're a little indie developer, but surveys, resources, research, like, there's lots of ways to include people in your process. The other thing for me is, that I think is really key for everybody to think about is, you get to make an accessible solution. You don't have to. And I think if that shift in narrative and that shift in mentality when it comes to accessibility was adopted by everybody, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. It is, at the end of the day, it is user experience, it is user enjoyment. And when you stop thinking about who your users are in these like little camps and just think about all your users as someone that you get to delight instead of something you have to delight and you have to like accommodate. I think it makes the process just so much easier to get it as far left as you can in that process of these are just features for people, not regulations that have to be.
And I think that's beautiful, because at the core of like most ableism and inaccessibility is like this fundamental, are you thinking of these people, us, as people? Like, do we count? Do we matter?
Yeah.
Should Virginia Tech make it so I can access the other 2/3 of the gamer lab that is supposed to be my lab? Maybe. I love that. That's beautiful. Ellie, do you have a big takeaway, or please remember, even if it's small?
I think kind of maybe going back to like my first point of like easy mode.
Yeah.
And the fact that, hey, gaming is for everyone and should be for everyone, but also give each other kindness. So if someone else needs a little bit of an accessibility thing that you're like, oh, I don't know, or don't judge them. Just let them enjoy, because at the end of the day, isn't that what we're all here for and why we all play video games?
I love that. That's so beautiful. Amazing. Thor?
Just to echo that, but also include people with disabilities in the jump at your creation of trying to get a game off the ground. Work with them throughout the process, not at the end of it. And I guess my message just comes down to include people with disabilities all the time, no matter what you're doing, so that everybody can be a part of it.
Yeah, I have two things. For those who are developers or starting out in developing a game, I would say it's okay to, like, I get, like, accessibility can be so daunting, because it just seems like I want to accommodate everybody, but it's just, I just don't have the knowledge to do so. It's okay to start small and grow from there, because you learn by doing, and having that, that small information, you just try the best you can, and when you can, be able to just work on the things you can, and then then basically you can grow from there. You can always take that learning into a new project or future updates to that project. So do what you can and then grow from there. And then if for those who are, you're obviously, well, I think all of us are gamers, your feedback is so critical. Your feedback is the thing that will help and move mountains sometimes in studios. So if there's a game that you're playing that either you find hard to be able to play based on your own capabilities, it's okay to either try to find a way to reach out to the studio or just even talk about it on social media. Like, that feedback is so important. I've had where literally heads of studios will see feedback from us in the community and take that and actually include it into future updates into their games. So now, obviously, don't go into it being like, your game sucks, because that's not constructive feedback. You're able to provide that feedback, like, here's my lived experience, here's the trouble I was having. That can move mountains. I love being able to have that kind of feedback. It's used as ammo for strongly worded emails, which I've heard from time and time again from developers, like what you've done, whether it's videos or social posts, like that has helped me kind of move this across the threshold from directors to executives. So your feedback is so crucial. So even if you want to start in consulting, that's the best way to do it. Is just start playing games, talking about it online, talking about your experiences, because that information is seen by a lot of folks. So yeah.
That's
Real
what,
quick, I know I'm not one of you, but because I have something to add to that.
I think we have a microphone too going around, maybe we can get to you.
Otherwise, you can feed your voice.
Yeah. I can repeat it to you if you've
All
heard
right.
it before.
By the way,
there's
Steve, you may
a,
not know me, but we've been in St. Paul's together. I'm Cerebral Paul.
Hey, Paul!
There you go.
Good to see you, buddy. Well, sort of.
So I was just gonna say, this thing on? What you just said is true, because a couple weeks ago I wrote an article when High Rock 2 came out, and said I was a very unhappy disabled gamer, because that game is not accessible. And they didn't correct a lot of things from the first game that I made them aware of at the first game, and they were like, okay, whatever. So that just told me they don't want me to play their game. So, but anyway, so I wrote the article. So before I came to PAX, I got a message, Cloud Media for Lords of Gaming.net, thank you. But I wrote an article, and one of the companies here saw the article. So I thought I was getting just a boilerplate, hey, while you're at PAX, come see our thing. On the bottom it said, on accessibility, we're an independent developer, we really want to talk to you about what we can do to make our game more accessible and how to make it work from the beginning. So what you just said, I'm proof of that.
Yeah.
They reached out to me, because
You never know who's reading, who's watching, who's looking. You can have either a junior developer all the way up to Phil Spencer at Xbox. Like, you never know who's watching or looking at it.
it's such a good reminder that we have voices and power. If you would like to practice this, make sure your badge is registered with the PAX Nav app, and then you will get the survey. If you can tell them you enjoyed this panel, you want more disability content, accessibility content. Same thing for if you played in the PAX Together intersection, the Access Forward Gaming Lounge. Let them know, because that's the way that we can keep having content like this at future PAXs, maybe even more. But yeah, Ashley, I should give you a turn.
Yeah, sometimes it really strikes me, and it took me a couple years to actually articulate this. We spend so much money on non-disabled people, but we always paint disabled people as burdensome, as barriers, as complainers, as expensive. The disabled people cost extra money to make the things that we need. And it's usually made in the wake of making something that's good for a non-disabled person. And you spend so much money and investment on non-disabled people. It's dehumanizing a lot of the ways that disabled people are forced to pick up the scraps and to push so hard for inclusion when or at a university that's full of stairs, and I don't just mean people staring at you because you got it flaunted, but a lot of barriers in the built environment. And you know, when we go and complain about things, they tell us how much it would cost to like rip everything up that they just installed. Like they put in a new classroom building where the acoustics are terrible, and I use hearing aids, and I can't teach in the new building, which is the more physically accessible building, in terms of getting my meat body there. And they spend so much money on something where they didn't think about how people would actually use the space, and it just strikes me as this like large scale issue where there's no problem in spending things when it benefits non-disabled people, and that's just a load of crap, right? Disabled people deserve everything and more that non-disabled people have and are given without fuss or fight, and it's just disgusting. All right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We only have like 2 minutes left, but very quickly, where can people see, hear you next? Like what is a thing you're doing, whether it's PAX or right after? Ashley, you need time to think. Can we start with you? Where can people see, hear, follow?
Yeah, super easy. So I do all my work right now with the .RPG project. I'm a digital accessibility consultant with them, and I'm starting to kick off our digital accessibility program. So that's anything from consulting on VTTs or PDF mediation or anything like that. So that's my big focus.
Awesome.
Come find us in the PDF. Hey.
Steve, Thor, and I have a panel literally in 3 minutes where we're talking about streaming and accessibility. So we're going to continue the conversation in a little bit of a different medium. And then other than that, you can find me on Twitch at Twitch/3Labelle because I like to make things confusing.
Speaking of confusing, my name, Thormingander. Take a picture because you're not going to remember it later. Also, you can find me at Thormingander on Twitch and many other socials, as well as the Thormingander, where I play absurd games with alternative controllers and also introduce people to tabletop card games like Magic the Gathering and talk about accessibility with people like this one.
You can find me online at Steve Saylor, that's SAYLOR. I do all video game content on YouTube as well as Twitch, and then majority of all socials. And I also run a show called Dungeons and Disabled with also Thor and Ellie, where basically we have disabled players playing disabled characters in fun actual play sort of settings, and we play with D&D, Dagger Heart, and it's fun.
I'm glad that it's time and space. Which will like be next? I had to like start going through.
Yeah.
I'll be in my classroom on Tuesday.
Read Ashley Shu's book Against Techno-Ableism, and yeah, you can come say hi to us in the Access Forward Gaming Lounge today and tomorrow. Thank you all so much for being here.